Okay, back again. All right, stop. My goodness gracious, standing room only. Okay. Well, I have approximately 45 minutes, and I think I have 62 slides. I wasn't quite sure what the group was going to be, what you've had before, and what you know already. So what I'll probably do is, depending on what I find out about your background, I'll skim through some and work on others, because I certainly won't have time for all 62 of them. So how many people here, I assume you all know what Bootstrap is. You've heard of the name before. How many of you have ever used it at all on anything? Okay, so we've got about half. How many of you have heard the name but really don't know too much more than that about it? Okay, we have a couple. What was that?
Who wants to admit that?
Yeah. Okay. And how many of you have create extensions or doing that kind of thing? Okay, so that's a good one. All right, so what I'll do is I'm going to start it, and we'll go through just an introduction to Bootstrap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through it all, but I probably won't spend a lot of specific time explaining it. And then we're going to go on to using Bootstrap in Joomla, and then looking at some specific examples. And if at all possible, what I'd like to do is end a little bit early so that we can maybe find out what some of you guys have had, and if you have questions or anything like that. Kyle will be having another presentation. I forgot to notice exactly when it was. I think it's on Sunday, but I'm not sure, where he will be doing a roundtable discussion with extension developers and template developers, trying to come up with best practices, so how we can use this so that everybody's talking the same language and working together. So that would be another good session for people to go to, and it's good to know the stuff that I'm going to be talking about here when you get into that. Okay, so basically the Bootstrap introduction, Kyle already went over the problem we're trying to solve, the way that a web page could look different on the same website from another one, depending on what component you have, so it didn't look like it was all integrated together. And that's one of the big problems we're trying to solve with this. I won't go over what it is. Well, I'm going to go over briefly what it is, how it works, and then exploring through it. So this is what I was starting to talk about, what the problem was with it. I won't go into too much right now because he did go over that. And then Bootstrap itself is mostly a basic set of CSS used for layout. They use mostly classes that you would add to your HTML markup that will work with that CSS, and if you use that for your markup, it's going to work to do the layouts for you, and it will also bring through the styling that the template has assigned to that, so that it'll make your components look like the others. It has the styles are set up so that they will work with responsive design. They won't do it automatically. Depending on how you choose to use Bootstrap, you're perfectly capable of creating a component that's not responsive at all. So I'll mention a couple of things that you're going to want to do if you want to keep it so it does work responsively. When it reduces in size, it'll actually move divs down below, etc. It's got it's got JavaScript scripts that go along with it that work along with jQuery. It itself does not include jQuery. You do need to make sure you have jQuery running at the same time. So this is basically all you have to do to set up just a little tiny thing in Bootstrap. Is you basically need to make sure that you have the Bootstrap CSS. Here I'm just showing you a minified version. That you've got jQuery running, and then you add the Bootstrap JavaScript. And then all you have to do from there is just use the classes that they have. And now here I'm just going to go, there are a couple of places where you can actually see what Bootstrap looks like. If you're really, really interested in it, This is the GitHub where you can download all of the, and I have a little resource screen at the end that has the URLs for all of these too. But this is where you can download the entire thing, and this will include, all the less files. It'll include the build to do rebuilds on it. It includes all of the documentation for what I'm about to show you. If you download that, what you get is something that looks like this, which is Bootstrap itself that you can use to add in, and it is also all of the documentation, so that you can do information on getting started, what you would do with it. And I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller because let's get it some of it shows on the screen. So it shows you how to get started with it. It'll go over some of the things I'm going to go over now in terms of the grid system, how all of this works. It'll show what the base CSS is if you want to look at what they do with with fonts and things, if you want to know tables, forms, buttons. It just goes through and gives you all of that information. It's really good documentation. And this is where you can find out about some of those things that Bootstrap has available to you that we are not actually using in the core of Joomla. So you might be used to looking in the core and seeing, well, how do they do that, and when they copy it from there, use that as a model. And here's what you can use as a model instead for those things that aren't in the core.
We are doing the full implementation of the core.
Yes, we have all of them. Yeah. That's part of the point. Is so that the stuff is all available in there. And then under components, it gives you additional things, like if you're doing button groups, how you could do breadcrumbs, doing labels and badges, and some other things. But you can go through here and see what's happening, how to create progress bars, how you would set that up with the CSS classes that you need to use. What we'd like to do at some point is have all of this information set up so that you could go to something like this for JUI, the Joomla user interface, and it would give you all the same information, but would add in all of the specifically Joomla stuff that we have. But right now you can use this to get that, and it also will show you some JavaScript things that if you want transitions to do it, the scroll spy, various other things that you can do in here. You won't really need to do it, but it also does give people the ability to actually customize it and just grab little pieces of it that they can decide which of these they want to do. So if you had some custom thing that you happen to be doing where you didn't want any of that other, you could create a little Bootstrap file from here and just select the pieces that you want. Now, we on Joomla have all of it coming through because we don't know what components people might add, and we want to make sure that people can use that stuff. And the other thing that it lets you do is if you come down here a little bit further, you can see that under scaffolding, you see how it says, you may be able to read that, I'm not sure, it says at body background, it says at white, at text colors, at gray dark, and down here it's saying, here's the blue, and it's a .049 CDB, that this is connecting into less, which is a superset of CSS. In other words, you could take a CSS file, change it so that you just change the .css to .less, and it's a perfectly valid less file. The thing that having it as a less file, though, is you can add variables to it, and the variables all start with this little @ sign, and you could use those wherever you would use some other piece of information, so that if you have, your borders are the same color as your link color, or the same color as that, you want that to look to go all through, the designers can just say, this is my link color, and whenever they have border, they can just say, 1 pixel solid at link color. And then if they change the link color somewhere else, because it's also they define what the link color is, at link color equal such and such, then they can recompile it, and it changes that throughout everywhere. So that there may be times when you as extension developers may, if you do end up using CSS, you may have ways that you want to hook into that kind of information as well. Chances are, though, you won't need CSS files at all. But that is what they would be using and going through. Okay, so that's a little bit on what you can see there. Okay. So this is where we went on these first two. This is the place, the mock-up of the examples for Joomla is the place where Kyle was earlier today, the kyleledbetter.com/JUI. All right, so through that real quick. So now we're on to actually using Bootstrap in Joomla extensions. What I'm going to go through, there are some CSS class names that have changed from 2.5 to 3.0, and you can actually, in a lot of cases, use both class names if you want to. You can keep some of the old class names and add in the ones that we have for Bootstrap. In some cases, there may be places where the HTML isn't going to quite work, but in a lot of cases, just adding that gets you pretty close to being able to have it in both places. jQuery is now available to you if you were wanting to use that for anything else. There is a grid system so that you can use that for laying out what you have. If you've used other grid systems before, this will be probably somewhat similar to it. It's a fairly simple system, and I'll be going over that in a minute. And then I'll be going over the classes, the navigation, tables, and forms as kind of some of the basic ones that you use in here. So screen doesn't look real, it's not real easy to see how this is set up, but basically they have two different grid systems. The original one they had was a static one, and they also have a fluid one that we use for the responsive stuff. But in both cases, they're actually set up as a 12 pattern. And you use this by saying that you're going to be in one of these. This one's going to be row. The fact that it says row means that this is one of the static scaffoldings. You just add to your class the span with the number as to how much of those 12 you want in here. So that if you wanted the whole thing, you'd do span 12. If you want to do, you see the 4, you can fit 3 of them in 12, 12 divided by 4 equals 3. Or if you knew you wanted 3 across, you can do 12 divided by 3, that gives you 4, that's how many you want to have. So you would just put the span 4 here. You can also do offsets, so that we want this to be able to add up to 12, so we'll have a span of 4. We're going to offset a section of 2, and then we'll have a span of 6. So that this would be dividing it up into basically a section here, a small, sort of blank space, and then a larger section over here. You can nest these in. When you're doing the static, what you want to do is make sure that what is in here is equal to whatever the parent is, because these are set up, using a certain number of pixels positions, so that if your first one is that span 4 and you wanted to nest inside that, you could nest in that with, let's say, the span 1 and a span 3, so that within that 4, you then got the smaller groupings in there. Make sense? And you'll see then down below we still have this span of 2 and 6. Now, getting into the responsive is all you do is you add -fluid to it. By putting the row fluid around this class, that means that it will actually know that it can split right in between these. So that if it's got enough room to have it here and have the whole thing out, it'll show it all in one. If not, it will start dropping down below appropriately. And you'll notice we're using the same thing, span 4, the offset 2, span 6. The difference here is that these are actually done as percentages. So that rather than it being a specific number of pixels, it's a percentage of a given width. You can nest here. The difference when you are nesting with the fluid responsive as opposed to nesting with the static is that each time you nest in, you start at 12 again. So you'll notice when we divide up this span 4, instead of it being 1 and 3, we're going to put 3 and 9 because we're going to actually look at that as being an entire space that we have here. And one of the things you may want to do here is you might want the whole thing to be fluid so that when you can break here between the span 4 and the span and this offset 2, 6, but maybe you don't want to break in between here, in which case you could actually change that and make this one just row instead of row fluid, and then it wouldn't break these two apart.
But I would still need 3 and 9 as opposed to 1 and 3.
Yeah, because no, at that point I think you would want to change that
So its
to
parent becomes 100%. And that
100%.
Yeah, because it's being static, you have the pixels inside.
Yeah.
And that's.
it'd be the pixels inside. Yeah. Okay. So now taking this and sort of bringing it into what we're doing in Joomla as examples, that when you look at the back end of it, the most common thing, one thing people are very familiar with is like the article manager, where you've got the, actually, just flip real quick. Okay, so you see the article manager in 3.0, and you've got this small section here, and then you've got this larger section going through here. And that is set up as a span 2, span 10. Now, that's something that if you're doing your own component, you know, this is the way it's going to work in it, and then it's just going to look just like all the others. If whatever your component does doesn't make sense to have it as a 2 and 10, you can change that. You know, you don't have to leave that as a 2 and 10. But if you want it to look in and look just like it's the others with that same, you know, width, then that's what you would do. The same to get the same look in the back end for the edit view. See, they have it with these groupings of the tabs, the article detail, the publishing options, article options, etc. up there, and what comes up here. And then we've got this little section over here. That's a separate one. So all of that tab function is the 10, and then the 2 is on the far side, and that's where we've just got that permanent information to sort of keep track of where you are and what's going on. The dashboard, which is the like the control panel, close it. You see that this has 3 separate sections that are being used here.
2, 6, and 4.
Very good. Exactly. Okay. So I'm not sure if you can see this or not. This is, I just pulled this directly out of the Bootstrap. Yes.
Before you get off the grid, so to
No
speak,
problem.
and you are
Yes.
moving off the grid.
I am moving off the
Okay.
grid onto some other.
Okay, yeah, the folks that dealt with Rocket Theme, you know, there's that 960 grid, you still have it and all that, but like to get fixed column widths and stuff like that, you know, everybody has to do some creative work to get a fixed pixel width, and you know, to kind of, you get the grid to line up pretty close, and then you shift it. That's what I do, you know, I
Yeah.
just stuff in a little CSS to shift
Okay.
things a little bit. Do you expect that a similar mechanism would be acceptable? Is there any other mechanism
You'll
to?
find a tremendous amount of similarity to grid 960 in terms of the construct.
Okay.
It really lays out the same.
Yeah.
You can, when you're static, specify the column gutter at 1 pixel to multiply.
Yeah, there's a little thing in here called a well that they have that will deal with adding gutters or not having gutters. And
Less does
so-
math for you. So when you
Yeah.
specify gutter, it figures out what column it needs to be to.
And, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because that's the other thing in less is you can actually do math calculations that reminded me of something else in those letters. I don't remember what it was.
Well, I'm gonna have more questions.
You can have more questions.
You know, with the grid and the responsive thing and the shuffling and fixed columns and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll let you get through that.
That's okay. Oh, I know what it is. It's funny that one of the things that sort of come back again. I don't know if everybody's familiar with it or not, but you know, it used to be once upon a time when we were dealing with, you know, IE 5. I remember that. Remember the difference between the type of box models they had? And does the box model include the border and the margins, or doesn't it? And what did in IE 5, so that if you said something was 200, that included everything. And in and then they got the other browsers in, and all of a sudden it didn't include the other stuff. You know, this was how much room you had for putting actual stuff in. And one of the things that has sort of come back around again is that with this mobile, where we're wanting the responsive and coming down and still having things line up, is that they brought back that old box model. That you can.
Plus does the math for you, so if you lay on a border, it does the math to make sure it fits inside the box.
Yeah, and you can also, some of them, if you go in, you'll notice if you look at it, they're specifying it as border box as being what the type is.
The CSS property.
That's the CSS property, yeah. So that is kind of, I won't go into much of that, but that is there. If you're noticing that sort of stuff, you might want to look into that and see what that might get you to. Any other layout kind of things for now? Yeah.
I've done a little bit with just taking Bootstrap, but then putting it into a different grid system.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'm imagining, but then at the same time, if you have components, they're going to be standardly using a span 2, span 4, span 6. So I'm imagining if you do want to use, like, for example, a 24-column grid,
Yeah.
then you should also have it work with the 12-column CSS from Bootstrap as well.
Probably, yeah. And it depends on what else you want it to make it work with. Because one of the things with this is trying to, so that it works with somebody who's using the standard Bootstrap. Mm-hmm. You know, if they're going to add components where somebody's using the standard Bootstrap. And again, there's a little.
From a developer's perspective, if you're making a component, it's going to fit into the component box. Inside the box, you always want to design it 2 to 100, so that it will grow and shrink in the responsive side or fit the space in the static side. As a nested box, it will just fit its own envelope. That's really the way you're just designing it. You don't worry about what their grid is outside of that in the box.
Right, because they could have something else out there and around, as long as you know you're looking at the layout piece of it. So you've got this outside box you're looking at too on the front end, but as
So there will be a standard for components. It would be to put everything.
you're
in a
looking
row.
at your layout, right?
Use a row fluid, so you're using 100% then. Or
Yeah, and then you have to decide on your component. Are you willing to let your component be responsive within itself and drop down? Or do you want to say that, okay, if they've got sidebars and doing all that, they can drop those whatever they want. But by gum, my component makes no sense unless it's
You can
a
have
static.
a very responsive to your component that will say if my 100% space is smaller than 600 pixels, split my 2 columns to 1 column.
Okay. So these are a couple of responsive classes you can also use to do it. That it's got visible phone, visible tablet, visible desktop, hidden phone, hidden tablet, hidden desktop. So you can decide that if it's on a phone, I don't want to show them this column. Maybe I want to show them the skinnier version of the column, but I don't want that. I want to hide that when it's on the desktop size. So you can use some of those. Mostly what you'll see in core is we're using hidden phone for a few things, just dropping a few columns. But on your components, you can use any of those to however makes sense to make your responsive work. These are just a few other things that you can use for special text. You can add a muted class, which grays the thing out. How many minutes?
15.
Okay, you're covering the number.
But this,
I could see I had minutes left. Okay, so I got 10 minutes left, guys. All right, and I'm on slide number
Yeah, we have
15 out of my
You have
61.
15
We have 15 minutes.
minutes left. I'm on 15 out of 61. Okay, so you've got the text warning, text error, text info, text success, and those will all be keyed in through their last columns as to what color those are going to be coming up with. So you could use that if you have, like error messages and various things that you want to do. A couple of useful classes, the pull right, pull left, that's kind of those float right, float left things, that's what they're using now. And then they've got the clear fix class. If you need to just clear your whole area, just create a clear fix for it. And it works to get added onto like the div you're in. You don't necessarily always have to have it as an additional class at the end. And then this is sort of a Jewy thing, not a Bootstrap, but we've got the class in element-invisible that you can use to attach to labels that you don't want to see, but for accessibility reasons you always want to have those. So if you attach that, they won't be seen, but they will be available to all the assistive technologies. Okay, so tables. If you're doing a table, just make sure it's called table. And then you can have different types of tables. If you want the stripy columns, zebra stripes, add that. Condense gets rid of some of the padding they automatically put in there. Do you want the borders around it? And do you want it to change the rows to change colors when you do a hover over it? And so you would put those in there. And all you would do is you just start adding them like you would put table and table striped. You want the hoovers, you add the table hover over it. What I'm suggesting here is if you're in the back end, add admin list to it too, which is the old version, and that will help a little bit for using some of the, if you're trying to do it multiple places. Now in the rows themselves, you also have these success error warning info that you can add to it to do some things like coloring. So that's sort of tables. I'm just not going to spend a lot of time on that, but forms. Bootstrap forms, standardly do it with the label here and then just below it is the input, the label, the input. If you want to do it sort of the standard Joomla way, which is the label and then the input, label, input, you would do the horizontal form instead. So you would just call it dot horizontal. You would then wrap the label and the control in something called control group, and then you would put control label class on the label itself, and you wrap them all around dot controls. I'll show you what this looks like. And if you want to have multiple actions at the bottom, everything is kind of lining up like this, but you have multiple actions, like cancel or do this or don't do that, and you want them to go like this, you can just wrap those in a div as well. Form actions that'll tell it that it wants to go horizontal. If you're doing the radio and checkboxes, you just add a class that's called .radio or .checkbox to the class, and that keys it in onto the kind of styling that it needs to have. And also make sure that on the input, you actually use that type to say that the input type is radio or checkbox. And if you want them to all show in one line as opposed to coming up and down, that's when you would use the dot inline on the label to keep that label in line with the controls. And you've all seen these little yes/no buttons. Those are actually just radio buttons. And the way to make that a radio button, using the J form, this is in your XML. All you need to do is make the class a button group, and then the label class is control label, and it'll do that for you. It'll look like that. You've probably seen some of this kind of thing if you've been in 3. How you've got an input and you've got something, just text or an image showing at the beginning or the end of something. All you have to do with that is just do an input prepend. In the span class, you say it's add on and say what you're adding on. So right here you can see add on the @ sign and it's up there because it's a prepend. And down here, you've got an append, and you're saying you want it, how big you want these things to be, of course, right down. And here's the span with the add-on of the .00, so that somebody's typing something in, you want them to just do even dollars, and that's an easy way to let them know to just do even dollars. And that's for text or pictures or something like that. Now you can do the same thing with buttons, and all you do there is it's just a button with a class button, the type button, and it's right there. So you've got the append to let them know that this is coming in. You want that all appended together. And now I've got my 10 minutes left, okay? When you're looking at the inputs, how big they're going to be, you've got a series of input sizes you can give it there. And you could also do the span sizes, and they'll go to the size of whatever that span is in there to do the whole thing. Like, let's see, Nicholas could still then use this to make a div this big to have his backup now button on. And just a couple of miscellaneous things. You can make the input read-only by using the disabled attribute. That's an attribute, not a class on it. There's the .uneditable-input that you can use so that it takes text and makes it look like it's a form that you can't enter anything into. Because sometimes you have something like that, you want it to look like it's a form input, and it really isn't. And that's how you would do that there. And for the help text on the form, you could do help inline or block, and all you have to do is just have the span class and then whatever the help is, and it will take care of all the CSS to have that either inline or to block. Now this also has some of the various buttons like the other things, but all you have to do is specify these as like a button primary, a button info, a button success, and they will do that. It's got the same kind of sizings as the input. I was going to go over the navigation a little bit to show you how that worked, but that's right within that documentation I was going to show, so you can look at that. I want to show you a couple of examples in Joomla first. So I'm doing this on the back end because it's something that everybody has right there, but obviously you can do all this, see this stuff in the front ends too. A couple of the changes you want to be aware of. The behavior tooltip becomes Bootstrap tooltip, so the bootstraps will work. And for the drop-downs, if you want them to be pretty, use this JHTML to do the behavior.chosen select. Your drop-downs will still work, but if you add this in, if you've got more than 10 things specified, it'll automatically add in a place where you can start typing a couple of letters to filter to make them much smaller. So it's a nice.
What does that Bootstrap tooltip actually do? Does it include the free UI or the UI classes? Because
it's the same as the behavior.tooltip, except that it's using the jQuery instead of the new tools.
Syntax is different as well.
Is it? Okay.
We use a rel instead of a class.
Okay. I hadn't noticed that.
Classes.
Okay. We should see that in just a minute. Okay. So this is the manager table. Basically, you set it up similar to what you've had before. You've got the Bootstrap and adding this thing in here. Getting into some of I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but this is the drag and I should say that don't copy this exactly because I've simplified a few things, but this is like the drag. Doesn't that look simple? This is the drag and drop ordering that you can do. That you would set this up so that it will let you do that in the saving the order. You've still got the sorting. We've got now the little sorting drop downs. So we've got a new script going for that. Now here is where we actually start doing the main div part of it. And this starts up to decide whether it wants to be the full 12, 5 minutes, or we want to go to just the 2 and the 10. So first it's doing is checking to see if you've got a sidebar or not. And if you do, it adds up the 2 and starts the 10. Otherwise, it just goes ahead with main container. It doesn't add the whole span thing on there. This is how you set it up so for the searching, and you can see that it's very similar. The differences here are you've got the button group with the pull left, you'll notice. These little places where I got orange, these are all the JText stuff, which I temporarily just pulled out because I couldn't fit everything on the screen. Now here's the, yeah, I've got the button and the has tooltip here.
Yeah, then it still uses
The old one? Okay. That's interesting.
They look different.
Because I pulled this right out of
Yeah, it's still using
3.0, so this must be one that's doing that. Okay. And then we've got the sort filter. Will come in here. And then it continues. Again, it's just getting these little groups of the button group with the pull right, having the information in it. I'm not sure it makes sense to go through the manager. Let me just pull out what might be having here. This is the ordering field now, what that looks like. One of the things you'll bump into when you're moving things over is the batch has now gone modal. So you'll want to make sure that you look at adding in this modal hide fade, some of that onto your modal information if you've got any of that for those little batch things down there. And then the modal body, and that's where all your control groups and everything go in there. So that needs to get a little bit rewritten, along with the footer on it that's doing the information. Now that sidebar, I just showed you that very briefly in there, and what that sidebar is all of those filters that used to be across the top now are the sidebar on the side. What you need to do that is when you're in the view.html.php, after you've created the toolbar, you just want to do this sidebar and do the render on it so that you have that sidebar available to you, so that when you go in and do the main layout, you can put it in either in the standard place, or if it makes more sense, you can do something else with it. Okay. So I've got about 3 minutes left. I can go through and show the a sample edit screen, or do people have questions that they would like to ask me instead? No questions? Okay, I'll keep going real quick. So this is the edit screen. Remember again, we've got the tabs across here and the content. So again, that's the 10 and the 2. We set it up to get this is the span 10 with the form horizontal. And then we do a UL that lists all of the navigation. And those will be those tabs across the top. You can it'll either be just the static navigation that you automatically know about, or you could have a couple that you know, and then you could do a for each loop that will be going and grabbing the rest of the information from your XML file, which often that's where you'll pull in, the metadata and the others. Okay, so then once you've got this little UL done that has the tab information, now you have to list the content for each of the tabs, content information, the tab pane for each one, and that is the tab content for the entire thing of all of your different tabs. And then within that, each one you have a tab pane for each of the different groups that you see at a time. Whichever one you want to be active when you go into it to begin, you throw the active on. So in this particular case, I'm showing this tab pane. Here's the details. Then you have a tab pane that would have the publishing, and then you might have additional tab panes down here, which could consist of just jumping out to a load template and a sub layout. And those would have the information in it. And then afterwards, you just put whatever hidden things you need to, you end the whole tab content, and then end that span of 10. So let's see. And then you can start that span 2, which is the right sidebar over there. And this one's a form vertical as opposed to that form horizontal, so the label is on top of what the input is. And again, you have your groups of your form controls for what's going to be in each of those little things that are on the side there. And then you just end it off and end the form. So this is just a little bit more on what was happening with those loops, those for each loops. This is how you do the for each loops to get on the nav bar to get the tabs across when you're just pulling it out of your XML. You can do that, and my time is up. And then the sub layout basically is going to look like the others. You just do the for each around for your different control groups. And here are the resources. And just really quick, there's my credit to the background guy who did the and there are the resources up there. Okay.